What if I told you that the very earliest non-Islamic account of Muhammad describes a movement that is just, well, completely disconnected from the deep, isolated desert?
Right, which is wild to think about.
Yeah, I mean, instead it places the epicenter of these events at the bustling, really cosmopolitan crossroads of the ancient Levant. We are talking about a fundamental shift in coordinates here.
A massive shift.
Right, like imagine a scenario where the foundational events of early Islam didn't unfold in the arid isolation of the Hijaz in modern-day Saudi Arabia, but rather, right amid the deeply populated, politically complex borderlands of Palestine and Jordan.
It completely alters the mechanics of the history. I mean, when you move the geographic theater of a historical event by, over 1,000 kilometers, you aren't just changing the scenery, you are changing the economic drivers, the geopolitical stakes.
Other logistics.
Exactly, the military logistics, and really the cultural context of every single decision made by the historical figures involved.
And that is the massive geographical paradigm shift we're taking a deep dive into today. We are looking at this deeply researched, heavily detailed thesis developed entirely by Dr. Khaled Waleed.
His work is incredibly thorough.
It really is. His work basically argues that the true historical geography of early Islam, and we're talking about the exact locations of Mecca, the Battle of Bodir, and the ancient biblical wilderness of Paran, has been, well, entirely misplaced by later traditional narratives.
And Dr. Waleed has provided a robust stack of source material to support this thesis. We're going to be analyzing his work on a 7th century manuscript from an Armenian historian named Sebeos.
Oh, the Sebeos text is fascinating.
It is. And we'll also be looking at Dr. Waleed's deep linguistic and etymological analysis of ancient Hebrew and biblical texts. Plus, we'll examine historical European maps inscribed in Latin that, place key cities in entirely different latitudes.
And don't forget the physical archaeological evidence.
Right, specifically these incredibly intricate architectural artifacts from the Petra region.
Now, before we get into the actual mechanics of Dr. Waleed's research, we really need to establish the parameters for you, the listener, for our discussion today. This deep dive touches on historical and religious narratives that are complex and carry profound significance for billions of people.
Absolutely.
So our role here is strictly analytical. We are not taking sides. We aren't endorsing Dr. Waleed's thesis as absolute truth, nor are we refuting the traditional narratives. Our sole mission is to impartially report on the data, the linguistic analysis, and the cartographic evidence contained strictly within Dr. Khaled Waleed's original research.
Yeah, we are basically operating as a lens for his methodology. We want to understand the how and the why behind his conclusions, how does he use a 7th century text to challenge a map?
Or why he argues that ancient Hebrew roots point to a highly specific topography.
Exactly.
So let's start with that 7th century text, because it really acts as the fulcrum for this entire geographic relocation. Dr. Waleed points to the writings of Sebeos, who was an Armenian bishop writing around the year 660 AD.
Which is an incredibly vital timestamp. I mean, we are looking at a document created mere decades after the foundational events of early Islam.
It's practically real time.
It really is. Dr. Waleed highlights Sebeos because this manuscript contains the oldest integrated non-Islamic description of Muhammad. It's a contemporaneous external perspective, which is huge.
Right, because it provides a baseline of observation from someone living within the broader geopolitical sphere of the Byzantine world.
Right, entirely separate from the traditional narratives that were systematically compiled and standardized centuries later.
And when you analyze a contemporaneous source, you aren't just looking for what they say, you're looking for the context in which they say it. Dr. Waleed breaks down Sebeos' account into several highly specific observations that they simply do not align with a deep desert origin story.
No, they don't.
The very first descriptor Sebeos uses, that Muhammad was a, quote, merchant from the sons of Ishmael.
Yeah, and the term merchant is doing a lot of heavy lifting in Dr. Waleed's analysis here. In the 7th century, a merchant operating at a level significant enough to be noted by a foreign bishop is not someone trading, subsistence goods in an isolated environment.
Right, you're not just trading goats locally.
Exactly. Dr. Waleed argues that this terminology links the figure directly to the massive, wealth-generating Levantine-Byzantine trade networks. We are talking about the incense routes, the spice trade, the movement of luxury goods from the Indian Ocean through the Red Sea and up into the Mediterranean basin.
And if you are a merchant in that network, you need infrastructure. You need letters of credit. You need to understand multiple languages like Greek, Aramaic, Syriac. and you need constant daily interaction with the administrative borders of the Byzantine and Sassanid empires.
It's a highly complex job.
It is. Dr. Waleed is essentially pointing out that the skill set of a major merchant requires a cosmopolitan, urbanized environment. You don't build that kind of political and economic capital hundreds of miles away from the nearest imperial customs house.
Right, and Dr. Waleed builds on this by looking at the theological context Ceballos provides. Ceballos describes this leader as a preacher of the God of Abraham who was actively teaching his followers the history of Moses.
Which immediately raises a demographic question, right? I mean,
Yeah.
if you're preaching the history of Moses, you kind of have to be in an environment where the history of Moses possesses immense cultural and political currency.
Precisely. Dr. Waleed really emphasizes this demographic reality. To teach the intricacies of Mosaic history implies a deeply embedded conversational proximity to established Jewish communities.
You have to know your audience.
Right. And in the 7th century, the demographic center of gravity for Jewish communities in the Near East was the Levant: Palestine, Jordan, Syria, the Galilee. Dr. Waleed points out that there is zero contemporaneous historical or archaeological evidence of a massive, culturally dominant Jewish population residing in the deep isolation of the Hejaz during this specific period.
So, if the audience for this new movement inherently understands and resonates with the history of Moses, Dr. Waleed argues the geographic setting literally must be the Levant.
It's just a matter of cultural resonance. I mean, you don't build a massive socio-political movement by referencing historical frameworks your immediate neighbors don't fundamentally understand.
That makes total sense.
Yeah.
But it goes beyond just shared history, doesn't it? Dr. Waleed also analyzes this fascinating aspect of Ceballos' account regarding an independent legal code.
Oh, yeah. Ceballos writes that this new leader laid down very specific laws. He lists them.
Right, he says no eating dead, unslaughtered meat, no drinking wine, no lying, and no fornication.
And from a sociological perspective, Dr. Waleed views this as a declaration of socio-religious sovereignty. This specific set of dietary and moral laws proves this movement was not perceived by contemporaries as just another Byzantine Christian heresy or like a localized reform movement.
Because if it were just a Christian offshoot, they wouldn't be introducing a brand new, highly specific dietary law regarding slaughtered meat. That isn't really a mechanism of Byzantine Christian theology.
Exactly the point Dr. Waleed makes. This is an independent Abrahamic Arab law code. By codifying these specific behaviors, the movement was drawing a hard societal boundary.
Right, creating a distinct new socio-religious identity capable of absorbing diverse tribal groups into a single unified political body.
And what does that unified political body immediately do? According to Ceballos, they form a massive political religious alliance with the Jews, specifically to reclaim the Holy Land to take Palestine back from the Byzantine Empire.
Wow. And this is where Dr. Waleed's geographic thesis truly locks in, I think. Because if you consider the logistics of that alliance, a coordinated military and political campaign to challenge the Byzantine superpower for control of Palestine, it implies intense, localized geopolitical stakes.
Exactly. Dr. Waleed frames this not as a distant desert uprising marching for months across hostile, empty terrain, but as a local northern coalition. It is a borderlands rebellion.
The logistics of a Hejaz to Jerusalem march in the 7th century would just be a nightmare. I mean, you were talking about moving an army across 1,000 kilometers of waterless dunes just to reach the battlefield.
It's nearly impossible.
But if this alliance is forming in the Levant, like in Jordan or the Negev, then marching on Palestine is basically a local border dispute. The supply lines, the shared intelligence, the tactical coordination with local Jewish populations, all of it suddenly becomes mechanically viable.
Dr. Waleed is arguing that the environment dictates the realm of the possible. The scale of the geopolitical maneuvering described by Ceballos just requires a geographic proximity that the Hejaz simply cannot provide.
Okay, I see the logic Dr. Waleed is building there, but I have to play devil's advocate here, looking at the very same text. If Ceballos is writing in 660 A.D., effectively in real time as these empires are clashing, why does his manuscript completely omit any mention of Mecca or Medina? I mean, if those cities were the absolute gravitational center of this new world-altering movement, how does a meticulous historian just fail to mention them?
And that glaring omission is actually the cornerstone of Dr. Waleed's textual argument. His answer is straightforward. Ceballos doesn't mention Mecca or Medina in the deep desert because, according to the actual 7th century reality he was observing, the epicenter of the movement wasn't there.
Oh, wow. So it's an absence of evidence that acts as evidence of absence.
Exactly. Dr. Waleed emphasizes that Ceballos never records a narrative of a revelation in the isolated desert. There is no mention of the Hijaz at all.
Right.
Instead, the entire narrative provided by Ceballos, the trade, the proximity to Jewish communities, the focus on Palestine, it all describes a socio-religious uprising indigenous to Syria, Palestine, and the Sinai.
It's kind of like observing the night sky. For centuries, people thought the Earth was stationary because they watched the stars move. It took a massive paradigm shift to realize the stars were relatively fixed, and it was the Earth that was spinning.
That's a great way to put it.
Dr. Waleed is basically saying the historical text, the stars of Ceballos' account, haven't changed. They clearly describe a Levantine movement. It's the map underneath that was spun centuries later.
And that leads directly to the next phase of Dr. Waleed's methodology. Because if Ceballos places these events in the north, and specifically identifies these people as the sons of Ishmael, we have to ask how the 7th century world defined that geography.
Right, because words change meaning.
Exactly. We cannot use a modern map to navigate ancient terminology. We have to decode the geographical spatial awareness of the people who actually wrote and read these texts.
Which takes us right into Dr. Waleed's linguistic and geographical decoding of the terms Ishmael and Paran. Because if you're going to claim the sons of Ishmael lived in the north, you have to prove that's what the phrase actually meant in antiquity.
And Dr. Waleed conducts a rigorous analysis of Byzantine and Syriac literature from the era leading up to and during the 7th century to do just that. He demonstrates that in the ethnography of the time, the term sons of Ishmael, or related terms like Hagarenes, was not a blanket term for anyone living in the Arabian Peninsula.
So it wasn't just a generic word for Arab.
No, it had a very specific geographic limitation. It referred explicitly to Semitic Arab populations inhabiting the northern borderlands. Dr. Waleed shows that in the ancient administrative and literary mindset, the Ishmaelites were the tribes living in northern Arabia, the Syrian desert, Palestine, and Jordan.
The frontier populations.
Right. They were the frontier populations deeply entangled with the Byzantine and Sassanid state apparatus. They were not viewed as the inhabitants of the distant southern Hijaz.
Okay, so when Ceballos says sons of Ishmael, a 7th century reader instantly envisions the tribes living in the Levant borderlands. But Dr. Waleed's research goes much deeper into this specific topography, specifically focusing on the wilderness of Paran. Because in the traditional, later compiled narratives, Paran becomes associated with the area around modern Mecca. How does Dr. Waleed dismantle that association?
He turns to the foundational texts. Dr. Waleed conducts this exhaustive linguistic and textual review of the Torah, the Midrash, and the Talmud. He argues that in the entirety of ancient Jewish and Christian literature, the wilderness of Paran is universally and consistently located in the north.
Universally?
Yes. Specifically, it encompasses the Sinai Peninsula, the Negev Desert, and the Araba Valley.
Let's look at the mechanics of his textual proof for that. Yeah. Because he points to Genesis chapter 21, which details the story of Ishmael and his mother Hagar being sent into the wilderness by Abraham. And the text explicitly states they settled in the wilderness of Paran near Egypt.
And Dr. Waleed points out the geographical necessity of that specific detail. Being near Egypt provides a hard coordinate. It firmly places the wilderness of Paran in the Sinai or the Negev. It geographically anchors the entire narrative of Ishmael to the Egyptian borderlands.
He also cross-references this with Deuteronomy 33.2. The text describes God shining forth from Mount Paran, placing it in immediate textual proximity to Mount Sinai and Seir. And Seir is the ancient name for Edom, which is located in modern-day southern Jordan.
So you see a cluster forming. Dr. Waleed notes that the ancient texts always group these locations, Sinai, Seir, Paran, together. They are a contiguous mountainous network. But Dr. Waleed doesn't just rely on contextual clues.
No, he digs into the actual morphology of the Hebrew language itself.
Which is where the methodology gets really fascinating.
Seriously, how does a single Hebrew word dictate a landscape?
Well, in ancient Semitic languages, words are built on root consonants that carry fundamental meanings. Dr. Waleed analyzes the Hebrew root of Paran, PRN, or Paran. Linguistically, this root does not signify a flat, endless expanse of sand dunes.
What does it signify?
The root inherently denotes a mountainous region, deeply carved with valleys and ravines. Dr. Waleed explains that this specific topographical description perfectly matches the physical reality of the region between Sinai and the Negev, which served as a crucial corridor for ancient trade routes.
So the very word Paran describes a rocky, valley-filled landscape, not the topography of the deep Hijaz.
Exactly.
But, textual interpretations can always be debated. People can argue over the translation of a root word until they are blue in the face. Dr. Waleed knows this, which is why he introduces visual, cartographic evidence from the ancient world to really solidify the textual claims. He points to the Madaba map.
Yes, the Madaba map is a pivotal piece of evidence in Dr. Waleed's thesis. It is a massive, intricate Byzantine mosaic map from the 6th century, laid out on the floor of a church in Madaba, Jordan.
It's beautiful, too.
Oh, it's stunning. And it represents the oldest surviving original cartographic depiction of the Holy Land and surrounding regions.
It is essentially a geopolitical statement embedded in stone. The people who made it lived in the region, so they knew exactly where everything was.
And Dr. Waleed's analysis of the Madaba map is definitive. On this incredibly detailed 6th century mosaic, the wilderness of Paran is explicitly located in the south of Palestine and the north of the Sinai.
Right there on that.
Right there. Furthermore, Dr. Waleed broadens the scope of this claim. He states that in his research, every single Jewish or Christian map created prior to the rise of Islam places Paran in this exact northern region.
Wait. Not a single pre-Islamic map places Paran in the Hijaz.
Not one, according to Dr. Waleed's findings. The consensus of ancient cartography is unanimous.
That's incredible. And if we look at the mechanism of cartographic drift, it makes total sense. I mean, think about how European colonizers brought names with them to the New World. You have a York in England, and you suddenly have a New York in America. Or you have religious groups migrating and bringing sacred place names with them to anchor their new settlements. It's like trying to trace the history of the American Revolution, but someone moves the map of Massachusetts to Texas.
That's a perfect analogy.
Dr. Waleed is arguing that a profound geographic relocation occurred in the later historical narratives. The foundational names, Paran, the sons of Ishmael, were historically anchored in the Levant, but the labels were eventually transposed hundreds of miles to the south on later maps.
He argues that the sacred geography was physically relocated to match the later political realities of a vastly expanded empire, shifting the narrative origin point away from the heavily contested Byzantine borderlands and deep into the Arabian Peninsula.
Okay, so if the text says the movement started in the north, and the ancient maps and languages place Paran and Ishmael in the north, we arrive at arguably the most explosive part of Dr. Waleed's thesis.
The cities.
Right. Where does that leave the famous, iconic cities of early Islam? If they aren't in the Hijaz, where are they? Let's dive into Dr. Waleed's true historical map and his relocation of Mocha and Badorul.
To do this, Dr. Waleed relies on a series of historical European maps, intricately detailed and inscribed in Latin. Now, one might ask, why rely on European Latin maps?
Yeah, that seems like a jump.
Well, Dr. Waleed explains that medieval cartography often preserved much older classical geographic traditions. These map makers were frequently compiling data from older Byzantine and Roman sources that had mapped the East meticulously for military and taxation purposes.
So they're basically acting as a cartographic hard drive, storing ancient spatial data. And when Dr. Waleed analyzes these maps, he doesn't just look for names, he looks for geographic anchors. The primary anchor he uses is the Dead Sea.
You have to establish fixed topographical coordinates before you can locate anything else. Dr. Waleed identifies how the Dead Sea is labeled in antiquity on these maps. It appears under several designations: the Sea of Egypt, the Salt Sea, or simply Yam, which is the ancient Semitic word for sea.
And the major water source feeding it, the Jordan River, is identified on these maps as the Sweet Sea or the Furat, which denotes a body of fresh water.
Once Dr. Waleed establishes this immutable framework, the Dead Sea and the Jordan Valley, he begins to track the locations of specific cities as they were plotted by these older cartographic traditions. And this is where he identifies a location named Mocha, spelled M-O-C-A, on the Latin maps.
And Dr. Waleed is making the direct claim that this Mocha is the true historical location of Mecca.
He is. And on these Latin maps, Mocha is not located deep in the Arabian Peninsula. It is positioned in the heart of a region labeled BIA, which is situated east and south of the Dead Sea.
Yeah.
Dr. Waleed takes the geographical coordinates of Mocha from these maps and explicitly links them to the ancient rock-cut city of Petra, also known historically by its biblical name, Kadesh Barnea.
Petra, the massive, wealthy Nabatean capital carved into the rose-red sandstone cliffs of southern Jordan. Dr. Waleed is arguing that the true historical Mecca was located in the Petra region.
That is the core of his geographical relocation. The maps place Mocha directly in the vicinity of Petra, firmly within the Levantine sphere of influence.
That immediately rewrites the visual landscape of the history. But it's not just one city. Dr. Waleed also traces the location of Badr. The Battle of Badr is one of the most significant, pivotal military engagements in early Islamic history. Traditional narratives place it in the Hijaz. Where do Dr. Waleed's Latin maps place it?
On those same Latin maps, Dr. Waleed points to a distinct location labeled Bedoro, spelled B-E-D-O-R-O. On the visual source material he provides, this location is colored in blue. Bedoro is situated on the west side of the Dead Sea, directly across the water from the region of Mocha.
So Mocha is east and south of the Dead Sea, and Badr is to the west.
Exactly. And Dr. Waleed notes that Bedoro is located right next to heavily documented ancient archaeological sites like Ngada, which is modern Engedi, and Tamaro. He identifies this Bedoro as the true historical location of the Battle of Badr.
Look at the military mechanics of that. If the battle takes place near Engedi, on the western shores of the Dead Sea, the logistics make absolute sense. Engedi is an oasis, a massive source of fresh water in a really harsh landscape.
And armies run on water.
Exactly. Armies in the ancient world lived and died by water logistics. Fighting a major engagement at a well-known strategic water source along a major Levantine trade route aligns perfectly with military realities.
Dr. Waleed's map condenses the entire theater of operations. He also locates the biblical land of Midian. According to his analysis of these maps, Midian is not a vaguely defined desert expanse. It is clearly demarcated as the entire region south of Jordan.
So it's very localized.
Right. The maps explicitly label this area with names like Bi'erathini, Medawa, and Esbuta.
So the entire foundational history Mecca, Badr, Midian is clustered tightly around the Dead Sea and the Jordan Valley. It takes an expansive, sparse desert narrative and compresses it into a highly dense, highly contested geopolitical choke point.
Which brings us back to Sebios. Dr. Waleed explains how this deeply concentrated northern geography perfectly validates the 7th century manuscript we discussed earlier. If Mocha is Petra and Bedoro is Engedi, then this movement was born directly on the borders of the Byzantine Empire.
Right in the thick of it.
Exactly. They were living on the major trade arteries that connected Damascus to Egypt. They were interacting with the dense Jewish populations of the Galilee and Judea.
It's the difference between a skirmish in the middle of the ocean and a battle in the Strait of Gibraltar. The location dictates the geopolitical value. If you are operating out of Petra, forming an alliance to march on Jerusalem isn't a miraculous logistical feat. It's a strategic maneuver across a few dozen miles of familiar territory.
Dr. Waleed is demonstrating that when you use the ancient maps instead of the modern ones, the political ambitions described in the 7th century texts finally match the geographical capacity of the region.
But, capacity isn't just about location, it's about resources. A movement capable of uniting tribes and challenging the Byzantine military machine requires immense wealth. It requires infrastructure.
It definitely does.
And a bustling trade route in the Levant, anchored around a metropolis like Petra, represent a massive concentration of capital. This isn't a story of impoverished nomads. Dr. Waleed introduces physical archaeology to prove just how rich and cosmopolitan this region was.
He provides visual evidence that completely shatters the traditional imagery of a sparse, isolated desert origin. Dr. Waleed presents photographs of ancient, intricately carved stone column capitals found in the Petra and Jordanian regions.
When we think of classical columns, we usually think of the Greek styles, Doric, Ionic, or those highly decorated Roman Corinthian columns covered in carved acanthus leaves.
Right, but these are entirely different, and they signal a unique cultural synthesis. The stone is a distinct reddish-beige sandstone native to the Petra region. But it's the design that Dr. Waleed really highlights. Instead of standard floral motifs, the corners of these capitals feature highly realistic, three-dimensional carvings of elephant heads.
The level of detail in the images Dr. Waleed provides is staggering. You aren't looking at an abstract representation. The sculptors carved the distinct anatomy of the trunk, the large ears pinned back against the stone, the texture around the eyes. Whoever carved these, and whoever paid for them, possessed an intimate knowledge of elephants.
And Dr. Waleed uses these elephant capitals as an architectural diagnostic tool to assess the economic reality of the true Mocha. Because what does an elephant represent in the architectural vernacular of the ancient Near East?
It represents globalism. You do not carve an elephant into your grand public architecture unless your society's wealth is directly tied to the places elephants come from. It signifies a direct, lucrative connection to the ivory trade, to the deep trade routes stretching to the Indian subcontinent or deep into the African interior.
Exactly. Dr. Waleed argues that an isolated deep desert encampment does not possess the economic machinery or the cultural exposure to produce globalized luxury architecture. Elephants denote massive wealth. They indicate a cosmopolitan society acting as a global hub, deeply integrated into intercontinental commerce.
It perfectly validates Scipio's calling the leader a merchant. A merchant operating in a society that builds with elephant capitals is a merchant dealing in massive capital. They are dealing with complex tariffs, international diplomacy, and diverse populations.
It's a completely different scale.
Yeah. They are operating in a society sophisticated enough to absorb different cultural influences and project their own wealth back out to the world.
Dr. Waleed points out that this is the exact socioeconomic profile required to launch a movement capable of rapidly expanding and taking on the superpowers of the 7th century. You need the economic engine of a global hub like Petra to fund and organize that level of political ambition.
To back up just how intensely populated and organized this region was, Dr. Waleed points to another piece of specific cartographic evidence on these maps.
Yes, he highlights a large, clearly defined zone labeled Mecaniorum. On the source maps Dr. Waleed analyzed, this area is prominently highlighted in red. He identifies this Mecaniorum region as encompassing the modern areas of Al-Karak and Wadi al-Hassa, which are located just east of the Dead Sea.
So right in the immediate neighborhood of his relocated Mocha and Petra.
Precisely. The fact that medieval cartographers, drawing on ancient sources, could explicitly name and define a massive territorial zone like Mecaniorum proves that this area was heavily populated, politically significant, and thoroughly mapped.
It wasn't just empty space.
Exactly. It was not a terra incognita. It was a dense geopolitical theater.
Okay, so Dr. Waleed has built a massive interlocking argument. He has the 7th century text of Seidos describing a Levantine merchant challenging Byzantium. He has the linguistic proof that the sons of Ishmael and Paran were universally understood as northern geography.
The Latin maps relocating Mocha to Petra and Badoro to Aingiri.
And he has the elephant capitals, proving the region possessed the immense wealth necessary for empire building.
But Dr. Waleed takes it one step further. He recognizes that to definitively relocate a religion's geography, you have to prove that its deepest foundational stories also align with the new map. You cannot have the 7th century events happening in the north if the ancient biblical patriarchs were supposedly operating in the deep south.
You have to make sure the roots of the tree match the branches. So Dr. Waleed takes us all the way back to the book of Genesis, performing a granular analysis of the original Hebrew text regarding Hagar and Ishmael.
He focuses specifically on Genesis chapter 21, verses 14 through 21. This is the origin point of the Ishmaelite lineage. Dr. Waleed deeply analyzes the geographic descriptors in the Hebrew text to establish their exact coordinates.
The text states that when Hagar and Ishmael were sent away, they wandered in the wilderness of Beersheba. How does Dr. Waleed map Beersheba ecologically?
He looks at the historical and ecological reality of Beersheba. It is not the deep, arid desert. It is an agricultural and pastoral border region situated in southern Palestine.
So it's a transitional zone.
Right. It acts as the transitional zone between the settled, fertile lands of Judah and the harsher Negev desert. Dr. Waleed argues that the text explicitly places the start of their journey firmly within the Levant.
But people can migrate. A critic might say they started in Beersheba and simply kept walking south until they reached the Hijaz, settling there to build the foundations of Mecca.
Dr. Waleed anticipates that counter-argument by highlighting a very specific logistical detail in the subsequent verses. Genesis states that while Ishmael was living in the wilderness of Paran, his mother, Hagar, got him a wife from Egypt.
And this is where the logistics of the ancient world act as a geographic lie detector.
Exactly. Dr. Waleed points out the mechanical reality of arranging a marriage in antiquity. If Ishmael is living in the wilderness of Paran, and that wilderness is in the Sinai or Negev as the Madaba map and all ancient texts claim, then obtaining a wife from neighboring Egypt is a standard, logical, local alliance.
You literally just walk across the porous border.
Right. It requires minimal logistical effort.
But if you apply the traditional map,
if you claim that Paran and the foundational settlement of Ishmael were located 1,200 kilometers to the south in modern-day Mecca, the text breaks down entirely. The logistics of a single mother traversing over 1,000 kilometers of the most brutal desert on Earth, traveling from Mecca to Egypt, finding a wife, and transporting her back across that same desert simply to arrange a marriage is historically and mechanically improbable.
It makes zero sense.
Dr. Waleed argues the text only functions rationally if the geography remains anchored in the north, right on the Egyptian border.
The geography has to match the human behavior described in the text. And Dr. Waleed finds another detail that links human behavior to the environment: ancient weaponry. The biblical text notes that Ishmael grew up to be an archer. Why does Dr. Waleed focus on the bow?
Because the effectiveness of a weapon is dictated by the topography it is used in. Dr. Waleed explains that the bow was the signature weapon of the Bedouins and the ancient Edomites who inhabited the rocky, mountainous terrain of the Sinai, the Negev, and southern Jordan.
That makes sense.
In a landscape filled with ravines and high ground, archery is devastatingly effective for both hunting and ambush warfare.
But in the deep, flat, sprawling expanses of the sandy desert,
Dr. Waleed highlights that the bow was not the primary, culturally associated weapon of the ancient tribes deep in the Hijaz during that era. The terrain didn't support its tactical dominance in the same way. By specifically identifying Ishmael as an archer, the text is culturally and militarily linking him to the northern mountainous regions of Edom and Paran.
So Dr. Waleed's ultimate goal in analyzing the Hebrew ruse, the marriage logistics, and the weaponry is to prove a massive historical consistency.
Yes. He is demonstrating that from the original composition of Genesis, all the way through the 6th century Madaba map, up to the 7th century historical accounts of Sebios, the ancient world possessed a unanimous, unbroken consensus regarding the geography of these events.
The entire historical stage was strictly in the Levant.
Dr. Waleed's thesis is that no Jewish, Christian, or external historical source prior to the rise of Islam ever linked these figures, the location of Paran, or the early battles, to the modern-day Hijaz.
He is saying the historical record is perfectly unified. It's only later, in the subsequent centuries, that the labels on the map were peeled off and shifted 1,000 kilometers south.
He argues the relocation was a later development, a retrospective mapping of sacred history onto a new geographical center of gravity as empires expanded and consolidated their narratives.
It is a staggering thesis. Let's synthesize the sheer scale of Dr. Khaled Waleed's research for you. He takes the 660 AD manuscript of Sebios, proving the earliest descriptions outline a cosmopolitan, Levantine merchant, heavily allied with Jewish communities, to fight a border war for Palestine.
He backs that up linguistically, showing that the sons of Ishmael and the wilderness of Paran strictly denoted the northern borderlands of Sinai and Jordan in the ancient lexicon.
He maps it physically, using Latin cartography to relocate Mocha to the rose-red cliffs of Petra and the Battle of Badr to the strategic oasis of Ain Gedi on the Dead Sea.
He validates the economic reality of that map through the archaeology of the elephant capitals, proving the region had the massive wealth necessary for empire building.
And he anchors the entire thesis in the original Hebrew of Genesis, proving the foundational stories of Ishmael's marriage and archery only function mechanically in the northern borderlands. Dr. Waleed hasn't just moved a dot on a map. He has re-engineered the entire geopolitical engine of the history.
And this demonstrates why investigating historical geography is so vital. We aren't just memorizing coordinates. Where a historical event happens dictates why it happened. A movement born in the deep desert is a story of sudden, inexplicable expansion.
Almost miraculous.
Right. But if Dr. Waleed's thesis holds, it transforms into a story of complex geopolitical maneuvering at the highly contested, wealthy crossroads of the Mediterranean world. It places the history squarely within the continuum of Byzantine and Near Eastern politics.
It completely rewrites the motives, the resources, and the tactical realities of everyone involved, which leaves us with a fascinating, almost unsettling thought to ponder. We've just explored how Dr. Waleed used a combination of ancient texts, linguistics, and medieval maps to suggest that a massive chapter of human history has been universally assigned to the wrong coordinates for centuries.
It's a huge proposition.
If his thesis is accurate, and the locations of these foundational events were geographically relocated by later generations for political or narrative convenience, well, it makes you wonder about the rest of the map.
It forces you to question how many other accepted historical locations are simply the result of a cartographer placing a label where the prevailing narrative demanded it rather than where the original text recorded it.
Exactly. What other epic stories of human civilization are sitting on the wrong latitude, just waiting for someone to dust off the original manuscripts? decode the ancient roots, and move the narrative back to its true home. It's a reminder to never stop questioning the map. You never know when you might discover that the ancient city you thought you knew was actually built on entirely different foundations. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into Dr. Waleed's research. Keep questioning.